socialism and communism is destructive. And in these countries, you're not allowed to preach the gospel as well. So anyone who promotes communism and socialism, you're also the enemy of Jesus, because in these countries, you're not allowed to preach Jesus the Christ. Amen. Let me be bold. I don't care what your political view is. In Jesus' name. Communism and socialism is enemy of prosperity, an enemy of the gospel of Jesus.
A new interim report released at the request of the British Foreign Secretary says Christian persecution in some parts of the world is, quote, close to meeting the international definition of genocide, with Christians being targeted by extremist groups in the Middle East, Sub-Saharan Africa, and East Asia.
Forcing Christians to renounce their faith. This persecution, just the latest attempt by Beijing to crack down on all religion. In August, the United Nations said China could be holding more than 1 million Uyghurs and other Muslims in internment camps for, quote, political education. Beijing says the camps are vocational training centers, bolstering economic growth, and of course, they say it's for social mobility.
You have to know where to look. Hidden in a block of flats, behind a bolted door. This is what faith looks like in China. Xu Yonghai has run this underground church in Beijing since 1989. He's been to prison or re-education through labor camps 3 times because of his beliefs. But these are the darkest days he's known, as the Chinese Communist Party stamps down on any version of religion that doesn't acknowledge its supremacy.
In fact, a massive new wave of persecution of Christians has been taking place in China as of recently. In the spring, China's president introduced a 5-year plan to sinicize all the nation's religions by infusing them with Chinese characteristics such as loyalty to the Communist Party. Over the last several months, the government has taken steps toward this measure by shutting down hundreds of private Christian house churches and taking their Bibles. According to CBN, the unregistered Protestant house churches that sprung up independently of the official Christian council were largely tolerated at one point, but have since become a target. Some Christians have even lost their jobs, been evicted from their homes, or even jailed for their faith. In March, a prominent Chinese house church leader was sentenced to 7 years in prison after he built Christian schools in Myanmar. China Aid reports that last month, half a dozen Christians were sentenced up to 13 years in jail for involvement in a so-called cult. China Aid says because of this crackdown, several dozen pastors and their families have fled to the United States in recent years. According to one pastor's wife, she stated that the government says that we have religious freedom, but really there is no freedom at all. Many of our Christian brothers and sisters are upset and fearful. Under the new crackdown, children and Communist Party members are banned from churches in their areas. And at least one township has encouraged Christians to replace posters of Jesus with portraits of the Chinese president. And with Christian persecution on the rise in China, China's good friend Russia has also made restrictions on religion. In fact, in 2016, Russia's newest law stated that there could be no evangelizing outside the church. In fact, in order to share their faith, citizens must secure a government permit through a registered religious organization, and they cannot evangelize anywhere besides church and other religious sites. The restrictions even apply to activity in private residences and online.
In this church, the people wake up at 4:30 to come together for 2 hours to pray and worship. They do this every day. This church meets in the only place they're safe, a cave. This church meets on a farm, far away from prying eyes. Here's an example of an underground church outreach. The people sitting are Christians. The people who are standing are not. This particular preacher was once crippled, but was healed when someone prayed for her. She now preaches the good news of Jesus to anyone who will listen. In this particular meeting, over 1,000 people became Christians. In Shanghai alone, there are over 3,000 house churches, just like this one. One thing Dennis pointed out to me was that most of the underground churches in China are actually led by young people. These kids have all come out of the communist system, and they want nothing to do with it. They only want to spread the love of Jesus to everybody they meet. This is a music school. Well, that's the cover anyway. It's really a training school for students who want to be pastors. The government thinks they're simply learning to play instruments. Dennis told me one story about a time he went to a very remote village in China to preach. He was led into a large room where the people were packed so closely together that he had his back to the wall and could reach out and touch the row in front of him. Everyone stood. There was no room to sit. He asked how long he should preach for, and they told him from 8:30 to 7 at night. Then they asked him if it wasn't too much trouble, could you come back tomorrow and preach from 8:30 to 7 again? And then, very sheepishly, they asked again, if you'd be so kind, could you come back the day after that and preach from 8:30 to 7? He asked how often he should take breaks, and they told him not to stop. The people will wait. Then he asked them what he should preach on. Everything, they replied, from Genesis to Revelation. And then it dawned on him, these people had no Bibles.
We were made to be courageous. We were made to lead the way. We could be the generation that finally breaks the chains. We were made to be courageous. We were made to be courageous. We were warriors on the front lines, standing unafraid. But now we're watchers on the sidelines.
We know that more than 2 billion people in the world are Christian. But are you aware that 245 million of these are persecuted? Think about that. Since the beginning of the church, Christians have been imprisoned, tortured, even killed. Persecuted unjustly. For over 25 years, Open Doors has been collecting data to understand and determine where, how, and why our brothers and sisters are being persecuted. And yearly, we create a ranking with the top 50 countries where it is the most dangerous to be a Christian. The World Watch List. The strong dictatorship and lack of religious freedom have kept North Korea at the top of the rankings since 2002. After many attacks on churches and several fatalities, Russia is now on the list after years of close observation. And with the continuing escalation of Christian persecution in the most remote areas of India, that country now enters the top 10 of the list. Whether persecuted by religious nationalists, your own family or community, or government itself, every Christian represented on this list needs support to continue speaking and living their faith.
made to be courageous. We were made to lead the way. We could be the generation that finally breaks the chains. We were made to be courageous. We were made to be courageous.